There's a particular kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in fake smiles and family gatherings, where the person who should respect you most treats you like an unwanted burden in your own home. I learned this harsh truth at 73 years old when my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and declared, "We'll decide what you need, mother-in-law," while systematically taking control of every aspect of my life. She thought my age made me weak, that my love for my son made me helpless, and that my desire to keep the family together would keep me silent forever. She was wrong on all three counts. What she didn't expect was that I had options she never considered, resources she didn't know about, and a backbone she'd never bothered to notice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Josephine Morris, and for most of my 73 years, I believed that family meant unconditional love, mutual respect, and the kind of bond that grows stronger through both joy and hardship. I spent 4 decades as Harold's devoted wife, watching him build his construction company from a single pickup truck into a thriving business that employed half our small town of Maplewood. When he passed 3 years ago, I thought I understood grief. What I didn't understand was betrayal disguised as care. I had always prided myself on being independent. Even after Harold's death, I maintained our beautiful colonial home on Elm Street, tended to the garden he'd loved so much, and managed my finances with the same precision I'd learned from 40 years of helping him run his business. At 73, I wasn't some frail elderly woman who needed constant supervision. I drove myself to doctor's appointments, volunteered at the local literacy center twice a week, and still hosted Sunday dinners for my son Matthew and his family. Matthew Robinson had always been my pride and joy. He'd inherited his father's work ethic and integrity, taking over the construction business seamlessly when Harold became too ill to continue. He was a good man, devoted to his work and his family. But somewhere along the way, he'd married Delilah Edwards, and that's where my story of careful manipulation and calculated cruelty begins. Delilah had grown up in the wealthier part of town, the daughter of a prominent lawyer who made no secret of his disappointment when she married a blue-collar man. From the beginning, she seemed determined to elevate her status by any means necessary. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that required constant maintenance, and she had a talent for making her voice sound sweet while delivering the most cutting remarks. The early years of their marriage had been manageable. Delilah was busy establishing herself in town, joining the right clubs, volunteering for the right causes, always photographed for the society pages of our local newspaper. She treated me with polite distance, never warm, but never openly hostile. I told myself this was normal, that not all daughters-in-law become best friends with their husbands' mothers. I focused on my relationship with Matthew and tried to stay out of their way. The shift began subtly after Harold's funeral. During those first raw months of grief, when I was struggling to find my footing as a widow, Delilah started making small comments disguised as concern. "Are you sure you should be driving in this weather, Josephine?" she'd ask sweetly in front of Matthew. "Maybe it's time to think about giving up some of these responsibilities that seem so overwhelming for you." At first, Matthew would defend me. "Mom's perfectly capable, Delilah. She's been managing fine." But Delilah was persistent and strategic. She'd bring up incidents that painted me as confused or forgetful, often exaggerating minor mistakes into major concerns. The time I forgot to turn off my garden hose became, Josephine left the water running for hours and nearly flooded the neighbor's basement. When I mixed up the dates for a doctor's appointment, it became, she's having serious problems with her memory and can't keep track of important things. The campaign was so gradual that I didn't recognize it as such until much later. Delilah had a gift for timing these conversations perfectly, always when Matthew was stressed about work or tired from long days. She'd present her concerns with such apparent love and worry that questioning her motives seemed ungrateful and paranoid. "I'm just worried about her living alone in that big house," she'd say, her voice full of manufactured concern. "What if she falls? What if she forgets to lock the doors? What if there's an emergency and no one's there to help?" Each question was designed to plant seeds of doubt in Matthew's mind about my capability and independence. The turning point came about 18 months ago when I had a minor fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. Nothing serious, just a scraped bumper when I misjudged the distance while backing out of a tight spot. The other driver was understanding. Insurance handled everything quickly, and I thought nothing more of it. But somehow Delilah heard about the incident within hours. She arrived at my house that evening with Matthew in tow, her face a mask of loving concern that I was beginning to recognize as her signature expression. "Josephine, we need to talk," she said, settling herself in my living room as if she owned the place. "This accident today, it's exactly what we've been worried about. You could have been seriously hurt, or worse, you could have hurt someone else." I tried to explain that it was a minor incident, that these things happen to drivers of all ages, but Delilah was already in full performance mode. "We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's clearly not," she continued, reaching over to take my hand in what appeared to be a gesture of affection, but felt more like a claim of ownership. "We love you too much to watch you struggle like this." Matthew sat quietly through this conversation, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved me, I knew that, but he also loved his wife, and she was very good at making her concerns seem reasonable and loving. "Maybe we should start thinking about some additional support," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Just someone to help with the heavy housework, maybe drive you to appointments." I should have recognized this as the beginning of a much larger campaign, but I was still operating under the assumption that their motives were genuinely caring. I agreed to a weekly housekeeper, thinking this small concession would ease their worries and maintain family harmony. What I didn't realize was that I had just given Delilah her first victory in a war I didn't even know was being fought. The housekeeper, it turned out, was someone Delilah had selected and was paying directly. A pleasant enough woman named Mrs. Peterson, but one who reported back to Delilah about everything she observed in my home. Suddenly, Delilah seemed to know intimate details about my daily routine, my eating habits, my sleep patterns, and my personal business. The invasion of privacy was subtle, but thorough. Within weeks, Delilah was making suggestions about my diet, my medications, my social activities, and my personal choices, all based on reports from Mrs. Peterson about things that concerned her. "She noticed you haven't been eating much," Delilah would say during her increasingly frequent visits. "And she mentioned you seem confused about your pill schedule. Maybe it's time we helped you organize these things better." I began to feel like a specimen under observation, my every action scrutinized and reported. But whenever I tried to discuss this with Matthew, Delilah was quick to frame my concerns as evidence of the very decline she claimed to be worried about. "She's becoming paranoid and defensive," she'd whisper to him, just loud enough for me to hear. "It's exactly what the articles about cognitive decline describe." The articles. That was another of Delilah's tactics. She'd arrive with printouts from medical websites, highlighting symptoms and warning signs that she claimed to observe in my behavior. She'd leave these materials strategically placed around my house, always with handwritten notes in the margins. "This sounds familiar?" Or, "We should ask the doctor about this." As I sat in my kitchen that morning, exactly 2 years after Harold's death, I realized that I barely recognized my own life. The independence I'd fought so hard to maintain was being eroded piece by piece, each small concession leading to larger demands for control. The respect I'd earned over decades of community involvement and family dedication was being systematically undermined by someone who smiled while she diminished me. I didn't know it yet, but that morning would mark the beginning of the most challenging and ultimately transformative period of my life. The phone call I was about to receive would set in motion a series of events that would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and my own strength. The woman who had spent months positioning herself as my loving caretaker was about to reveal the true extent of her ambitions, and I was about to discover resources within myself that I never knew existed. The morning that would change everything started like most others in my carefully maintained routine. I was in my kitchen at 7 a.m., brewing the same Earl Grey tea Harold and I had shared for decades, when the phone rang with a call that would shatter the illusion of normalcy I'd been desperately trying to preserve. It was Dr. Patricia Newman, my physician for the past 15 years, calling with results from the routine blood work I'd had done the previous week. Her voice carried that particular tone medical professionals use when they're trying to sound reassuring while delivering concerning news. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Josephine, I need you to come in this afternoon to discuss your test results," she said carefully. "There are some irregularities we need to address, and I'd prefer to go over them in person rather than over the phone." My heart skipped, but I kept my voice steady. "Is it serious, Dr. Newman?" "It's something we can manage, but it requires immediate attention and some lifestyle adjustments. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? And Josephine, I'd recommend bringing someone with you for support and to help remember the details we'll discuss." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where Harold and I had shared thousands of meals, made countless decisions, and built our life together. The morning sunlight streamed through the lace curtains I'd hung 30 years ago, illuminating the small stack of mail I'd been sorting through: bills, charity requests, and a letter from my dear friend Evelyn Taylor, who had moved to Arizona after her husband's death. Evelyn and I had maintained a friendship spanning over 50 years, from our days as young wives supporting each other, through the challenges of marriage and motherhood, to our current status as widows navigating the complexities of aging alone. Her letters had become a lifeline, full of stories about her new community, her volunteer work at the local animal shelter, and her adventures exploring the Southwest. I reached for the phone to call Matthew about the doctor's appointment, but hesitated. Over the past months, every health-related issue had become ammunition for Delilah's campaign to prove my declining competence. A routine checkup became evidence that I was having problems managing my health. A prescription adjustment became proof that I was too confused to handle my own medications properly. Instead, I decided to call Evelyn first. Despite the early hour in Arizona, she answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the kind of genuine concern I'd been missing in my daily interactions. "Josie!" she exclaimed, using the nickname only my closest friends employed. "What a wonderful surprise! How are you holding up, dear?" I found myself pouring out my concerns about the doctor's appointment, but also about the larger situation that had been weighing on my mind. Evelyn listened without interruption, the way true friends do, before responding with her characteristic directness. "You know, Josie, I've been worried about you. Your last few letters seemed different, more guarded somehow. Are you sure everything is all right with Matthew and that wife of his?" The question hung in the air, and I realized how carefully I'd been editing my communications, even with my dearest friend. I hadn't wanted to burden her with my family troubles, but also, speaking them aloud would make them real in a way I wasn't prepared to confront. "Delilah means well," I said automatically, the phrase I'd repeated so often it had become a reflex. "She's just concerned about my welfare." Evelyn replied, and I could practically hear her skepticism through the phone. "Well, you know, your situation better than I do. But remember, concern that diminishes your independence isn't the same as care that supports it." After we hung up, I sat with her words, recognizing a truth I'd been avoiding. The care I'd been receiving felt increasingly like control, each act of supposed kindness designed to make me smaller, more dependent, less capable of making my own decisions. I finally called Matthew at his office, explaining about the doctor's appointment and asking if he could accompany me. His response was immediate and loving, exactly what I needed to hear. "Of course, Mom. I'll pick you up at 1:30. Whatever this is, we'll handle it together." But when he arrived that afternoon, Delilah was with him, settling herself into my passenger seat as if her presence had been assumed rather than requested. She was dressed impeccably as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the afternoon heat. Everything about her appearance conveyed success and sophistication, a sharp contrast to my simple blouse and comfortable pants. "I hope you don't mind that I came along," she said with her practiced smile. "I thought you might need the extra support, and I've been reading about medical advocacy. It's so important to have someone taking notes and asking the right questions." Before I could respond, she was already organizing her purse, pulling out a leather-bound notebook and an expensive pen. "I've prepared a list of questions we should ask Dr. Newman, and I think we need to discuss your current medications to make sure there aren't any dangerous interactions." The presumption in her words, "we need to discuss, we should ask," set my teeth on edge. But Matthew looked relieved to have his wife's organizational skills applied to what he clearly viewed as a stressful situation. I found myself outnumbered before we'd even left my driveway. Dr. Newman's news was serious but manageable. My blood pressure had spiked significantly, my cholesterol levels were concerning, and there were early indicators of diabetes. All conditions common in women my age, all treatable with medication and lifestyle modifications, but requiring careful monitoring and consistent management. "The good news is that we've caught everything early," Dr. Newman explained, her manner both professional and reassuring. "With proper diet, regular exercise, and the right medications, there's no reason you can't continue living independently and actively for many years to come." I felt a surge of relief, but Delilah was already taking extensive notes, asking detailed questions about symptoms, complications, and warning signs. Her questions were thorough and intelligent, but they focused heavily on worst-case scenarios and the potential for cognitive impairment. "What about confusion or memory problems?" she asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "I've read that these conditions can affect mental clarity, especially in elderly patients." Dr. Newman glanced at me, then back at Delilah. "Josephine's cognitive function is excellent. These are physical health issues that are very manageable with proper care. There's no indication of any mental decline or confusion." But Delilah pressed on. "What if she forgets to take her medications? What if she doesn't recognize the symptoms of a medical emergency? Shouldn't someone be monitoring her more closely to ensure her safety?" I watched this conversation unfold, with growing unease, realizing that Delilah was essentially building a case for increased supervision using Dr. Newman's medical expertise as ammunition. Every answer became a potential justification for reducing my independence. Every precaution a reason for additional oversight. Matthew, clearly overwhelmed by the medical information and genuinely concerned about my well-being, seemed to find comfort in his wife's detailed approach. "Maybe we should set up one of those pill organizers," he suggested, "and perhaps someone should check on you daily to make sure you're feeling all right." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly, speaking up for the first time since we'd entered the doctor's office. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own medications and monitoring my own health." Delilah's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course you are, Josephine. We're just trying to think ahead, to make sure you have all the support you need. There's no shame in accepting help when it's offered with love." The word love in her mouth sounded rehearsed, calculated, and I realized with startling clarity that this medical appointment had become another battlefield in a war I was only beginning to understand. Dr. Newman's reasonable medical advice was being transformed into justification for a level of control that had nothing to do with my actual health needs. As we left the medical office, Delilah was already making plans. "I think we should schedule a family meeting to discuss the best way to support you through these health challenges," she announced, her arm linked through Matthew's as they walked ahead of me toward the car. "We need to make sure all your needs are being met properly." I trailed behind them, feeling suddenly invisible despite being the supposed focus of all this concern. The afternoon that should have been about addressing manageable health issues had somehow become about my competence, my independence, and my right to make decisions about my own life. That evening, alone in my house, I sat in Harold's old recliner and tried to process what had happened. The medical news, while serious, was far from catastrophic. But Delilah's reaction suggested she saw it as an opportunity rather than a concern, a chance to escalate her campaign for control under the guise of medical necessity. I thought about Evelyn's words from that morning about the difference between concern that supports independence and concern that diminishes it. Looking back at the past 18 months, I could see the pattern clearly now. Each helpful suggestion, each expression of worry, each offer of support had been designed to make me smaller, less capable, more dependent on their guidance and approval. The realization was both frightening and liberating. Frightening because it meant acknowledging that someone I'd tried to love and accept had been systematically undermining me. Liberating because understanding the game meant I could finally start playing it strategically rather than simply enduring it. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. I was going to start documenting everything, every conversation, every helpful suggestion, every attempt to diminish my capabilities or independence. If Delilah wanted to play games with my life, she was about to discover that I had learned a few strategies during my 73 years on this earth. The battle lines were being drawn, though only one of us knew it yet. The family meeting Delilah had orchestrated took place the following Sunday at my house, though I quickly realized I was more of a subject than a participant. She arrived with Matthew 30 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously like the one she used for her real estate business. The sight of it made my stomach clench with apprehension. "I thought it would be helpful to have everything organized," she explained, settling herself at my dining room table as if she were chairing a board meeting rather than discussing my personal life. "I've done some research on the best approaches to managing health concerns for people in your situation. People in your situation." The phrase stung with its clinical detachment, reducing me to a category rather than treating me as an individual with specific needs and preferences. Matthew looked uncomfortable, but said nothing as Delilah spread out printed articles, medication charts, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline of incidents she claimed demonstrated my declining capabilities. I recognized some of the events she'd documented: the minor fender bender, the forgotten hose, the mixed-up appointment, but seeing them compiled and presented as evidence of incompetence was jarring. "I've been tracking patterns," she announced, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used in her professional life. "And I'm concerned that we're seeing a clear decline in judgment and memory that could put Josephine at serious risk." She opened her portfolio and began reading from what she called her incident log. Each entry was dated and detailed, describing moments from the past year that she'd witnessed or heard about secondhand. But as she read, I realized she was presenting a carefully curated version of events, one that emphasized confusion and minimized context. The day I'd spent 20 minutes looking for my car keys became episode of significant memory confusion, lasting over an hour, requiring assistance to locate essential items. The afternoon I'd felt dizzy after working in the garden during a heat wave became unexplained disorientation and physical instability suggesting possible medication side effects or cognitive issues. "Delilah," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "That's not what happened with the keys, and you know it. I'd simply put them in my purse instead of their usual spot." She looked at me with what appeared to be patient understanding, but felt distinctly condescending. "I know these incidents seem minor to you, Josephine, but that's exactly what makes them concerning. People experiencing cognitive decline often don't recognize the severity of their symptoms." The circular logic was maddening. If I disagreed with her assessment, that disagreement itself became evidence of the very decline she claimed to observe. Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly torn between loyalty to me and trust in his wife's apparent expertise. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Delilah smiled her practiced smile and pulled out another set of documents. "I've researched several options for enhanced support services. There are wonderful assisted living communities right here in Maplewood, places where you'd have your independence but also access to medical care and social activities." The words hit me like a physical blow. Assisted living. She was proposing to move me out of the home I'd shared with Harold for 38 years, the house where I'd raised my son, where every room held memories of a lifetime spent building something meaningful. "I'm not moving anywhere," I said firmly. "I'm managing perfectly well in my own home." "But are you really?" Delilah's voice remained sweet, but there was steel underneath. "Let's be honest about what's happening here. You're isolated, struggling, with health issues, and showing signs of decline that could become dangerous. We're not going to wait for a serious accident or medical emergency to force our hand." Our hand. The presumption was breathtaking. She was speaking as if my life were a problem that she and Matthew needed to solve, as if my preferences and autonomy were obstacles rather than rights to be respected. Matthew finally spoke up, his voice gentle, but resolute. "Mom, I think we should at least look at some options. Not necessarily moving right away, but having a plan in place." I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be thoughtful and fair, and realized that months of careful manipulation had done their work. Delilah had positioned herself as the voice of reason and responsibility, while casting me as the stubborn elderly woman too proud to accept necessary help. "I see," I said quietly. "And who exactly would make these decisions about my life?" Delilah exchanged a glance with Matthew before responding. "Well, naturally, we'd all discuss everything together. But given your health situation and some of the confusion we've been observing, it might be wise to establish some legal protections." Legal protections. The euphemism was transparent. She was talking about power of attorney, about removing my right to make decisions about my own life, finances, and future. "I think this meeting is over," I announced, standing up from my own dining room table. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not interested in discussing assisted living or legal arrangements that would diminish my independence." As they gathered their papers and prepared to leave, I overheard Delilah whisper to Matthew near the front door, her voice just loud enough to ensure I caught her words. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The defensive reaction, the inability to see reason. "We may need to consider more immediate action if she won't cooperate with reasonable safety measures." After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the furniture Harold and I had chosen together, the photographs documenting decades of family life, the books we'd read and discussed during quiet evenings. The thought of losing all, of this, of being relocated to some sterile facility because my daughter-in-law had decided I was incompetent, filled me with a rage I hadn't felt since Harold's death. That evening, I called Evelyn in Arizona, needing to hear a voice that saw me as capable and autonomous, rather than as a problem to be managed. "Josie, you sound upset," she said immediately. "What's happened?" I told her about the meeting, about Delilah's documentation and proposals, about the casual way they'd discussed rearranging my entire life without seeming to consider my own wishes. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment before responding. "That woman is trying to steal your life, Josephine. Not just your money or your house, your actual life, your right to make choices about how you want to live." The stark assessment hit home because it captured something I'd been struggling to articulate. This wasn't just about concern or even control. It was about erasure, about reducing me to a manageable problem rather than respecting me as a person with rights and preferences. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling more vulnerable than I had since Harold's death. "Matthew believes her, and she's so good at making everything sound reasonable and caring. First, you document everything, just like she's doing, Evelyn said firmly. But you document the truth, her manipulations, her power plays, the way she's isolating you from your own son. And second, you get your own legal advice. Don't let her be the only one talking to lawyers. After we hung up, I sat at Harold's old desk and began writing. I documented the real version of events Delilah had distorted, the manipulative tactics she'd employed, the gradual escalation of her control. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking active steps to protect myself rather than simply enduring what was happening to me. But even as I wrote, I knew that documentation alone wouldn't be enough. Delilah had spent months positioning herself as the responsible family member, while painting me as confused and declining. She had Matthew's trust and support, while I was increasingly isolated and dismissed. The next morning brought an unexpected and illuminating phone call. It was Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper Delilah had hired to help me with cleaning and who I'd assumed was simply doing her job. "Mrs. Morris," she said, her voice hesitant and apologetic. "I need to tell you something that's been bothering me. Mrs. Robinson has been asking me to report on everything you do, what you eat, how you spend your time, whether you seem confused about anything. She wants detailed information about your daily activities." The confirmation of what I'd suspected still felt like a punch to the stomach. "What kind of information?" "Everything. Whether you take your medications on schedule, whether you seem forgetful, whether you have visitors or phone calls. She even asked me to look through your mail and tell her if you receive any unusual correspondence or bills you seem to be struggling with. The invasion of privacy was complete and systematic. Delilah hadn't just been observing my decline, she'd been orchestrating surveillance to create evidence of it. Every private moment in my own home had been subject to scrutiny and reporting. "Why? Are you telling me this?" I asked. Mrs. Peterson sighed deeply. "Because you're a kind woman who doesn't deserve to be treated like this. And because some of the things she's asking me to report aren't even true. She wants me to say you seem confused when you're as sharp as anyone I know." That afternoon, I made 2 crucial phone calls. The first was to Jonathan Pierce, an attorney Harold and I had used for our estate planning years earlier. I explained the situation and asked for an immediate consultation about protecting my rights and autonomy. The second call was to Dr. Newman's office, requesting copies of all my medical records and a written assessment of my cognitive competence. If Delilah wanted to use medical concerns to justify controlling my life, I would arm myself with actual medical facts rather than her distorted interpretations. As I prepared for what I knew would be an escalating battle, I thought about the woman I'd been before Harold's death, strong, independent, capable of making tough decisions when necessary. That woman was still inside me, buried under months of manipulation and self-doubt, but not destroyed. Delilah had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that age made me weak, that grief made me vulnerable, and that family loyalty made me controllable. She was about to discover that while I might be 73 years old, I was far from powerless, and I had resources she'd never bothered to investigate. The war she'd been waging in secret was about to become very public, and I intended to win. The meeting with Jonathan Pierce took place on a crisp Thursday morning in his downtown Maplewood office, the same oak-paneled room where Harold and I had signed our wills and established our trust nearly a decade earlier. Jonathan, now in his early 60s with distinguished silver hair, had known our family for years and greeted me with the kind of genuine warmth I'd been missing in recent months. "Josephine, it's wonderful to see you, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "Your phone call certainly raised some concerns. Tell me exactly what's been happening." I spent the next hour laying out the entire situation, Delilah's gradual campaign of control, the manufactured evidence of my declining competence, the family meeting where assisted living had been presented as inevitable, and most alarmingly, the surveillance system she'd established through Mrs. Peterson. Jonathan listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Josephine, what you're describing is a form of elder abuse called undue influence. It's more common than most people realize, and it often comes from family members who justify their actions as being in the elderly person's best interest." The term elder abuse felt harsh, but hearing it applied to my situation by a legal professional provided a clarity I hadn't expected. This wasn't just family drama or generational conflict. It was a systematic attempt to undermine my autonomy and decision-making capacity. "What are my options?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotion I felt rising. Jonathan opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. "First, we need to ensure that all your legal law protections are current and ironclad. I want to review your will, your healthcare directives, and your power of attorney documents to make sure there are no vulnerabilities that could be exploited." He spread the papers across his desk, pointing to various sections as he explained. "Your current will is solid, and you've maintained control of all financial decisions. That's good. But I'm concerned about the healthcare power of attorney you signed 5 years ago, which names Matthew as your primary decision-maker if you become incapacitated." My heart sank as I remembered signing that document, thinking it was a reasonable precaution that would ensure my son could make medical decisions on my behalf if I was ever unable to do so myself. Now I realized it could become a weapon in Delilah's hands. "Given what you've told me about your daughter-in-law's influence over your son and her apparent desire to have you declared incompetent, we should consider updating that document to include more specific protections," Jonathan continued. "We can add language requiring multiple medical opinions before any determination of incapacity can be made, and we can specify exactly what circumstances would trigger your son's authority." The next hour was spent reviewing and updating my legal documents, adding layers of protection I'd never imagined needing. We established requirements for independent medical evaluations, specified that any claims of incompetence would need to be supported by professional assessments rather than family observations, and created additional safeguards around financial decisions. "There's something else we should discuss," Jonathan said as we neared the end of our meeting. "Given the surveillance and manipulation you've described, you might want to consider documenting everything going forward. Keep detailed records of conversations, save any written communications, and consider whether you want to make any changes to your estate planning." The suggestion caught me off guard. "What kind of changes?" "Well, if someone is systematically trying to have you declared incompetent in order to gain control of your assets, you might want to consider whether they should benefit from those assets in the long run. It's something to think about, not necessarily something to act on immediately, but worth considering." As I drove home from Jonathan's office, my mind was racing with new information and possibilities. The legal protections felt empowering, but I also realized that Delilah's campaign was likely to escalate once she discovered I was taking steps to protect myself. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Evelyn Taylor stood on my front porch, her silver hair gleaming in the autumn sunlight, 2 large suitcases beside her. "Evelyn!" I exclaimed, pulling her into a fierce hug. "What are you doing here? I thought you were settled in Arizona." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "I've been worried about you since our last conversation, Josie. Something in your voice told me you needed support, and at our age, we can't afford to wait for convenient times to help each other." As we carried her bags inside, she explained that she'd decided to take an extended visit to Maplewood, ostensibly to see old friends and handle some business affairs, but really to provide me with the ally I desperately needed. "Besides," she said with a wink, "I've always wanted to meet this daughter-in-law of yours who seems to have such strong opinions about how you should live your life." Evelyn's presence changed the entire dynamic of my situation overnight. Here was a witness to my actual competence and independence. someone who could observe and document the reality of my daily life, rather than the distorted version Delilah had been creating. More importantly, she was someone who saw me as I truly was. A capable woman dealing with normal aging challenges, not a declining elder in need of constant supervision. That evening, as we caught up over dinner, Evelyn asked pointed questions about my health, my finances, and my daily routine. Her inquiries weren't invasive or controlling like Delilah's. They were the natural concerns of a friend who wanted to understand my situation and offer appropriate support. "You seem perfectly sharp to me," she observed after I'd explained my medical situation and the lifestyle changes Dr. Newman had recommended. "These are manageable health issues, not cognitive problems. What exactly is this daughter-in-law claiming is wrong with you?" I showed her Delilah's incident log, the carefully curated list of events that painted me as confused and declining. Evelyn read through it with growing incredulity. "This is character assassination disguised as concern," she said flatly. "She's taking normal human experiences, misplacing keys, feeling dizzy on a hot day, having a minor traffic accident, and reframing them as evidence of incompetence. It's manipulative and cruel." The next morning brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Delilah arrived unannounced, as had become her habit, but stopped short when she encountered Evelyn in my kitchen, calmly preparing breakfast for both of us. "Oh," Delilah said, her practiced smile faltering slightly. "I didn't realize Josephine had a visitor." "I'm Evelyn Taylor," my friend replied with cool politeness. "Josephine's oldest friend. I'm visiting from Arizona for a few weeks." I watched with fascination as two strong-willed women sized each other up. Delilah, impeccably dressed and perfectly made up even at 9 a.m., represented polished control and careful manipulation. Evelyn, comfortable in casual clothes with her gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, radiated the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and no agenda beyond genuine friendship. "How wonderful that you could visit," Delilah said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but wonderful. "I hope Josephine mentioned that we've been having some concerns about her living alone. Having additional supervision will certainly be helpful during this transition period." "Transition? Period?" Evelyn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Josephine seems to be managing beautifully. What kind of transition are you referring to?" Delilah's smile became more strained. "Well, we've been discussing some additional support options. Josephine's health situation requires more monitoring than she can really manage independently." "Really?" Evelyn's voice remained pleasantly neutral, but I could hear the steel underneath. "What health situation would that be? She seems remarkably healthy and independent to me." I realized I was witnessing a masterclass in polite warfare. Evelyn was systematically dismantling Delilah's narrative without raising her voice or showing obvious hostility. Each question forced Delilah to either back down from her claims or reveal the weakness of her evidence. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Delilah suggested, clearly uncomfortable with having a witness to her usual tactics. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Evelyn replied smoothly. "If there are genuine concerns about Josephine's well-being, surely they can be discussed openly. After all, I'm here specifically to spend time with her and see how she's doing." After Delilah left, visibly frustrated by her inability to control the conversation, Evelyn turned to me with grim satisfaction. "That woman is dangerous, Josie. She's not just trying to control your life, she's trying to erase your agency entirely. But she made a crucial mistake today." "What mistake?" "She assumed you were isolated and vulnerable, with no one to witness what she's been doing. Now she knows that's not true, and manipulators like her don't function well when they know they're being watched." That afternoon, Evelyn suggested we visit Dr. Newman's office to collect the medical records and competency assessment I'd requested. The documentation was comprehensive and unambiguous. My cognitive function was normal for my age, my health issues were manageable, and there was no medical basis for questioning my ability to make independent decisions. "This is your insurance policy," Evelyn explained as we reviewed the documents. "If Delilah tries to have you declared incompetent, you have professional medical evidence contradicting her claims." As we drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control over my own life. The legal protections Jonathan had put in place, the medical documentation supporting my competence, and Evelyn's presence as both witness and ally had shifted the balance of power significantly. That evening, as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset, Evelyn asked the question that would change everything. "Josie, what do you really want? Not what others think you should want, not what would make everyone else comfortable, but what would make you happy and fulfilled for whatever years you have left." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to think beyond the immediate crisis of Delilah's manipulation and consider what I actually wanted for my future. The answer surprised me with its clarity and certainty. I wanted to live on my own terms, make my own choices, and use my remaining years meaningfully. I wanted to stop being defensive and start being proactive, and most importantly, I wanted to ensure that the resources Harold and I had worked so hard to accumulate would go toward purposes that reflected our values, not serve the ambitions of someone who saw me as an obstacle to be managed. The awakening was complete. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The transformation began at dawn the next morning. While Evelyn prepared coffee in my kitchen, I sat at Harold's old desk with a yellow legal pad, methodically listing every asset, every account, and every financial arrangement that represented 43 years of marriage and careful planning. The numbers were substantial, more substantial than Delilah had likely realized when she began her campaign to control my life. The house alone was worth nearly $400,000, fully paid off and sitting on 2 acres of prime Maplewood real estate. Harold's life insurance and pension had left me comfortable, and our conservative investments had grown steadily over the years. Combined with savings and various accounts, my total assets approached $1.2 million, a sum that would certainly motivate someone like Delilah to pursue guardianship or power of attorney. "Substantial enough to be worth fighting for," Evelyn observed, reading over my shoulder. "No wonder she's been so persistent." My first call that morning was to Jonathan Pierce. "I want to make some immediate changes to protect my assets," I told him without preamble. "If Delilah is planning to escalate her efforts, I need to ensure she can't access or control anything while we're battling over my competence." Within hours, Jonathan had arranged for me to meet with Harold's former business partner, Gary Clark, who now ran a successful investment firm in the neighboring town of Oakville. Gary had remained a family friend after Harold's death, occasionally checking in on me, but respecting my independence and privacy. A refreshing contrast to the suffocating oversight I'd been experiencing from my own family. "Josephine," Gary said warmly as we settled into his office that afternoon. Jonathan explained some of what's been happening. "I have to say, I'm shocked. Harold would be furious if he knew someone was trying to manipulate you this way." We spent the next 2 hours implementing a comprehensive financial protection strategy. Gary helped me transfer the majority of my liquid assets to new accounts at his firm, accounts that would require multiple forms of identification and verification before any changes could be made. We established a trust structure that would protect my holdings while maintaining my full access and control. Most importantly, we set up automatic safeguards that would trigger if anyone attempted to claim financial power of attorney on my behalf. Any such claims would require independent verification of my incapacity by multiple medical professionals, and even then, control would pass to a professional trustee rather than to family members. This gives you maximum protection while maintaining complete autonomy, Gary explained as we reviewed the documents. If someone tries to claim you're incompetent, they'll find themselves dealing with professional trustees and institutional safeguards rather than simply taking control of your accounts. The process was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. For months, I'd felt like I was playing defense, responding to Delilah's moves rather than making my own. Now I was taking proactive steps to protect what Harold and I had built together. But the most significant decision came that evening as Evelyn and I sat in my living room reviewing the day's accomplishments. She was reading through the trust documents when she looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Josie, have you considered what you actually want to do with all of this?" She gestured toward the financial papers spread across my coffee table. "Not just protecting it from Delilah, but what legacy you want to create." The question stopped me short. I'd been so focused on preventing Delilah from controlling my assets that I hadn't really considered what I wanted to accomplish with them. Harold and I had always assumed they would eventually pass to Matthew. But that assumption had been made when I believed my son would respect my autonomy and make decisions based on love rather than manipulation. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew where she was heading. "I mean that you have resources that could make a real difference in the world. You could support causes you care about, help people who genuinely need assistance, create something meaningful rather than simply maintaining wealth for its own sake." That night, I lay awake thinking about Evelyn's words. What did I care about? What had Harold and I valued during our years together? The answers came clearly. Education, independence for seniors, support for small businesses like the one Harold had built, and helping people maintain their dignity and autonomy as they... The next morning, I called Dr. Newman's office and asked to speak with her directly about a matter unrelated to my personal health. When she came on the line, I explained that I was interested in supporting programs that helped seniors maintain their independence and wondered if she knew of any local organizations doing that kind of work. Actually, there's a wonderful program called Independent Living Support that works specifically with older adults who want to remain in their homes, she said. They provide everything from minor home modifications to transportation services to meal delivery. They're always looking for funding to expand their services. I took down the contact information and spent the rest of the morning researching the organization. Their mission statement could have been written about my own situation: supporting seniors in maintaining dignity, autonomy, and independence in their own homes and communities. By afternoon, I had arranged to meet with the program director, Nora Green, an energetic woman in her 50s who had founded the organization after watching her own mother struggle with similar issues to what I was facing. "The biggest challenge we see," Nora explained as she showed me through their modest offices, "is family members who mean well but end up taking away their elderly relatives' independence in the name of safety. We try to provide practical support that enhances autonomy rather than diminishing it." The parallel to my own situation was unmistakable. As Nora described their programs, home safety assessments, transportation for medical appointments, grocery delivery services, and advocacy support for seniors dealing with family conflicts, I realized I was looking at a blueprint for the kind of help I wished I'd had access to months earlier. "What would it take to expand your services?" I asked. Nora's eyes lit up. "Funding is always our biggest limitation. We have a waiting list of seniors who need our help, but we can only serve about 30 families at a time with our current resources. If we could triple our funding, we could probably serve the entire county." That evening, as Evelyn and I prepared dinner together, I told her about my meeting with Independent Living Support and the idea that had been forming in my mind. "I want to make a substantial donation to their program," I said. "Not just a one-time gift, but enough to ensure they can expand their services permanently." Evelyn smiled knowingly. "How substantial are we talking about?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I was thinking about half of my liquid assets, around $400,000. The number hung in the air between us. It was a substantial portion of what I would have left to Matthew, but it would transform the lives of hundreds of seniors who were facing the same kinds of challenges I'd been dealing with." "What about Matthew?" Evelyn asked gently. "What about his inheritance?" I considered the question carefully. Matthew will still inherit the house and the remaining assets. He'll be financially secure, but this money will go toward something that actually reflects the values Harold and I shared, rather than enabling someone who's been trying to steal my autonomy. The next morning, I called Jonathan to discuss the legal mechanics of making such a large charitable donation. He listened carefully to my plans, then asked the question I'd been expecting. Josephine, I have to ask, are you making this decision because you're angry with your family or because you genuinely want to support this cause? It was a fair question, and I gave it the consideration it deserved. Both, I answered honestly. I am angry that my own family has been trying to manipulate and control me, but I'm also genuinely committed to supporting an organization that helps seniors maintain their independence. If my donation can prevent other families from going through what I've experienced, then it serves a purpose beyond just redirecting money away from Delilah. Jonathan nodded approvingly. That's the right answer. Charitable giving motivated purely by spite rarely leads to satisfaction. But giving that aligns with your values while also protecting your assets from exploitation. That's sound decision-making. By the end of the week, the legal framework was in place. Independent living support would receive a $400,000 endowment that would fund their expansion throughout the county. The donation would be made through a charitable trust that would provide tax benefits while ensuring the money was used effectively. More importantly, the donation would be announced publicly, with my name attached as the founding donor of the new Senior Independence Initiative. The announcement would make it clear that I was mentally competent, financially secure, and actively engaged in meaningful philanthropy. Hardly the profile of a confused elderly woman in need of guardianship. As I signed the final documents, in Jonathan's office, with Evelyn serving as a witness, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with spite or revenge. This was my money, earned through decades of hard work and careful planning, being used to support causes I genuinely cared about. The woman who had spent months trying to convince everyone that I was too confused to manage my own affairs was about to discover that I was competent enough to give away nearly $500,000 to charity, and savvy enough to do it in a way that would make any future claims of incompetence extremely difficult to sustain. The war was far from over, but I had just won a decisive battle. And more importantly, I had remembered who I really was. Not a victim to be managed, but a person with agency, resources, and the wisdom to use both effectively. The next phase would test everything I'd learned about standing up for myself. But for the first time in months, I felt ready for whatever Delilah might try next. The announcement of my donation to independent living support appeared in the Maplewood Gazette on a Tuesday morning, complete with a photograph of me shaking hands with Nora Green at the organization's offices. The headline read, "Local Widow Establishes $400,000 Senior Independence Initiative." The article detailed my commitment to supporting programs that help elderly residents maintain their autonomy and dignity in their own homes. I was in my kitchen, sharing coffee and the newspaper with Evelyn, when my phone began ringing at 8:47 a.m. The caller ID showed Matthew's number, but when I answered, it was Delilah's voice that came through, sharp with barely controlled fury. "What have you done?" she demanded without preamble. Matthew is beside himself. $400,000, Josephine? Have you lost your mind completely? The irony of her question wasn't lost on me. For months, she'd been arguing that I was too mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, yet now she was outraged that I'd made a substantial financial decision entirely on my own. "Good morning, Delilah," I replied calmly. "I assume you're calling about the newspaper article." "Yes, I've made a significant donation to a cause I believe in strongly." "A cause you believe in?" Her voice rose an octave. "This is exactly what we've been worried about. You making impulsive, irrational decisions without consulting anyone. Giving away nearly half your liquid assets to some random charity is not normal behavior, Josephine." Evelyn, who could hear Delilah's voice clearly from across the kitchen table, rolled her eyes and made a note on the pad where she'd been documenting our interactions. The idea had been hers, to maintain detailed records of every conversation, every manipulation attempt, every effort to paint my competent decisions as evidence of decline. It wasn't impulsive, I said firmly. I researched the organization thoroughly, consulted with my attorney, and made a carefully considered decision about how to use my own money. The donation is being made through a charitable trust with proper legal oversight. Your own money? Delilah's laugh was harsh and bitter. That money was meant to be Matthew's inheritance. You have no right to give away his future security to satisfy some misguided notion of charity. There it was. The truth finally stated plainly. Not concern for my well-being, not worry about my competence, but anger that I had dared to dispose of money she considered already hers. The mask was slipping, and I pressed the advantage. Actually, Delilah, it is my money, earned by Harold and me over 4 decades of marriage and work. Matthew will still inherit substantial assets, including this house and my remaining investments, but I have every right to support causes that matter to me with my own resources. We'll see about that, she snapped. Matthew and I are coming over this afternoon. We need to have a serious discussion about this situation. After she hung up, Evelyn looked at me with grim satisfaction. She just made a critical error, Josie. She revealed that this has never been about your well-being or competence. It's been about controlling money she thinks should belong to her. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite the looming confrontation. Should I call Jonathan and ask him to be present for this meeting? Not yet, Evelyn advised. Let's see how far she's willing to go when she thinks she only has to deal with 2 elderly women. Sometimes the best way to expose someone's true nature is to give them enough rope. They arrived promptly at 2 p.m., Matthew looking genuinely distressed, and Delilah radiating cold fury barely contained beneath her professional demeanor. She was carrying her leather portfolio again, along with what appeared to be additional documentation. Mom, Matthew began as they settled in my living room, I have to say I'm concerned about this donation. $400,000 is a tremendous amount of money to give away without discussing it with family first. Since when do I need family permission to make charitable donations? I asked mildly. Your father and I always supported causes we believed in. This is simply a continuation of values we've held for decades. Delilah opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Josephine, we've been documenting concerning behaviors for months now, and this impulsive charitable giving is exactly the kind of financial decision-making that indicates cognitive decline in elderly individuals. She began reading from what appeared to be an expanded version of her incident log, but this time the entries were more detailed and more damning. According to her records, I had been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, confusion about financial matters, and inability to make rational decisions about asset management. This is a fabrication, I said firmly, but Delilah continued reading as if I hadn't spoken. 3 weeks ago, subject became agitated when offered reasonable assistance with medication management. 2 weeks ago, subject showed paranoid ideation by accusing family members of surveillance. 1 week ago, subject made irrational statements about family members trying to control her life. Evelyn leaned forward in her chair. Excuse me, but who exactly are you calling subject? Are you referring to Josephine as if she's some kind of case study rather than a person? Delilah's composure cracked slightly. I'm simply documenting behaviors that concern us as a family. No, Evelyn said coolly. You're creating a fictional narrative designed to support a predetermined conclusion, and you're doing it right in front of the person you're discussing, which shows remarkable disrespect. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn, I appreciate your friendship with my mother, but this is really a family matter. Family matter. Actually, I interjected, Evelyn is here because I asked her to be. She's been observing my daily life for the past 2 weeks and can speak to my actual competence and independence. Delilah's eyes narrowed dangerously. What exactly has she been observing? That your mother is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. Evelyn replied before I could answer. She handles her own medications correctly, manages her household efficiently, makes thoughtful decisions about her health and finances, and demonstrates clear thinking about complex matters. What I haven't observed is any evidence of the confusion or decline you keep claiming to see. You've known her for 2 weeks, Delilah snapped. We've been watching this deterioration for months. Watching or creating? Evelyn asked pointedly. Because from what I've observed, Josephine's problems seem to stem from being constantly questioned, undermined, and surveilled, rather than from any actual cognitive issues. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Delilah played what she clearly considered her trump card. We've consulted with an attorney about guardianship proceedings, she announced, her voice taking on a threatening tone. Given the pattern of declining judgment and the recent irrational financial decisions, we believe legal intervention may be necessary to protect Josephine from herself. Matthew looked shocked. Delilah, we discussed getting a consultation, not actually filing papers. The consultation confirmed our concerns, she replied smoothly. Substantial charitable giving without family consultation, combined with the behavioral issues we've documented, provides grounds for a competency evaluation. I felt my heart rate increase, but my voice remained steady. I see. And what exactly would this guardianship accomplish? It would ensure that your remaining assets are protected and that decisions about your care and living situation are made by people who have your best interests at heart, Delilah replied, her mask of concern sliding back into place. People? Like you? I asked. People like your son, who loves you and wants what's best for you. I looked at Matthew, this man I'd raised to be honest and fair, and saw the conflict in his eyes. He genuinely believed his wife's claims about my declining competence, but he was also uncomfortable with the aggressive tactics she was proposing. Matthew, I said gently, do you really believe I'm incompetent to manage my own life? He was quiet for a long moment before answering. Mom, I'm worried about you. Some of the things Delilah has observed, combined with this huge donation. What if I told you that the donation was made with full legal consultation, proper documentation, and safeguards to ensure the money is used appropriately? I asked. What if I told you that I have current medical documentation confirming my cognitive competence? What if I showed you that every decision I've made has been carefully considered and legally sound? Delilah jumped in before Matthew could respond. That's exactly what someone with declining judgment would say. The inability to recognize one's own limitations is a classic symptom. Evelyn stood up abruptly. Enough. Josephine, show them the medical records Dr. Newman provided. I retrieved the folder from my desk and handed Matthew the comprehensive cognitive assessment Dr. Newman had prepared. He read through it carefully, his expression growing more confused with each page. This says you're cognitively normal for your age, he said finally. It specifically states that you're competent to make independent decisions about your health and finances. When was this evaluation done? Delilah demanded, snatching the papers from Matthew's hands. Last week, I replied. After you suggested I might need a competency evaluation, I decided to get one from an actual medical professional. Delilah scanned the documents, her face growing paler with each page. This doesn't change anything. Medical evaluations can be manipulated, and a single assessment doesn't outweigh months of observed decline. Actually, Evelyn said with quiet satisfaction, it changes everything. If you proceed with guardianship proceedings, you'll have to explain to a judge why you're seeking to have someone declared incompetent despite current medical evidence to the contrary. You'll also have to explain why your months of observed decline weren't noticed by medical professionals, friends, or anyone outside your immediate family. The calculation was clear in Delilah's eyes. She was realizing that her carefully constructed case was crumbling in the face of actual evidence and professional documentation. But rather than backing down, she doubled down. Fine, she said, standing up and gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. If you want to make this difficult, we'll make it legal. "Matthew, we're filing the guardianship petition tomorrow." Matthew looked stricken. "Delilah, maybe we should reconsider—" "No," she said firmly. "Your mother is clearly being influenced by outside parties who don't understand the full situation. The courts will see through this manipulation and ensure she gets the protection she needs." After they left, the house felt heavy with the weight of battle lines finally drawn openly. Evelyn and I sat in my kitchen, processing what had just occurred. "She's going to follow through," I said, feeling suddenly exhausted. "She's actually going to try to have me declared incompetent." "Yes," Evelyn agreed grimly. "But she just made several crucial mistakes. She revealed her true motivations. She made threats in front of a witness, and she's proceeding despite medical evidence contradicting her claims. Most importantly, she underestimated you." That evening, I called Jonathan Pierce to inform him about the guardianship threat. His response was swift and reassuring. "Josephine, given the medical documentation we have and the evidence of your competent decision-making, including the charitable donation, I'm confident we can defeat any guardianship petition. But I want you to be prepared. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. The frightened, confused woman who had been allowing herself to be manipulated and controlled was gone. In her place was someone I remembered being long ago, strong, determined, and ready to fight for what mattered. The battle was just beginning, but I was no longer fighting it alone or unprepared. And for the first time in months, I was confident about the outcome. The guardianship petition was filed on a Friday morning, and by afternoon, the entire town of Maplewood seemed to know about it. In a community of only 8,000 people, legal proceedings involving prominent families don't stay secret long, especially when they concern someone like me who'd been active in local charities and civic organizations for decades. The first call came from Nora Green at Independent Living Support. Her voice was tight with concern when she reached me that evening. "Josephine, I've heard some disturbing rumors about legal proceedings. Is everything all right? Should we be concerned about the donation?" I assured her that the donation was secure and legally protected, but I could hear the worry in her voice. Nothing damages a charitable organization's reputation like being associated with contested donations or family disputes over mental competence. "The timing is suspicious, isn't it?" Nora observed. "Filing for guardianship immediately after you make a substantial charitable donation suggests their primary concern isn't your well-being." Over the weekend, the phone calls multiplied. Harold's former business associates reached out, offering support and expressing shock that anyone would question my competence. Several neighbors called to say they'd been contacted by investigators working for Delilah's attorney, asking questions about my daily habits and mental state. "It's character assassination disguised as due diligence," Evelyn observed as we tallied the calls. "She's trying to build a case by gathering hearsay and speculation from people who might have seen you having a normal senior moment." The most painful call came from my longtime friend Claire Cooper, who'd served with me on the library board for 15 years. Her voice was hesitant and uncomfortable. "Josephine, I hope you won't be offended, but someone claiming to represent your family's legal interests asked me some questions about you. They wanted to know if I'd noticed any confusion or memory problems during our board meetings." My heart sank. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that you're one of our most engaged and thoughtful board members, and that I've never seen any signs of cognitive decline. But Josephine, I have to ask, is everything all right? Why would your own family be asking these kinds of questions?" I spent 20 minutes explaining the situation to Claire, watching her reaction evolve from confusion to outrage as she understood what was happening. "This is appalling," she said finally. "That woman is trying to destroy your reputation to support her legal case. What can I do to help?" By Sunday evening, I had compiled a list of 12 people who'd been contacted by Delilah's investigators. The pattern was clear. They were casting a wide net, hoping to find someone who might have observed behavior they could twist into evidence of incompetence. What they found instead was a community of people who knew me well and were increasingly angry about what they perceived as an attack on one of their own. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Patricia Newman arrived at my door during her lunch break, still wearing her white coat and carrying a medical bag. "Josephine, I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced, but I've been contacted by attorneys representing both sides of this guardianship matter. I wanted to make sure you understood exactly what's happening from a medical perspective." We sat in my living room while she explained the legal process. The court will likely order an independent psychiatric evaluation, which is standard in guardianship cases. But given the medical documentation we already have, and the fact that I'll be testifying on your behalf, I'm confident about the outcome. "What exactly will you testify to?" I asked. "That you're cognitively normal for your age, that you've been managing your health conditions appropriately, and that there's no medical basis for questioning your competence to make independent decisions." I'll also point out that the timing of this petition, immediately following a substantial charitable donation, raises questions about the petitioner's motivations. Dr. Newman's visit was both reassuring and sobering. Having professional medical support was crucial, but it also emphasized how serious the situation had become. Someone was literally trying to have me declared legally incompetent, and if they succeeded, I would lose the right to make decisions about my own life, finances, and future. That afternoon brought news that shifted the entire dynamic of the case. Jonathan Pierce called with information that changed everything. "Josephine, my investigator has uncovered some interesting information about Delilah's financial situation. It appears she's in significant debt, credit cards, a second mortgage on their house, and substantial losses from some high-risk investments she made without Matthew's knowledge." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Matthew doesn't know about the debt? According to the financial records we've obtained, no. She's been hiding it from him, probably hoping to resolve the situation before he discovered it. Your assets would certainly solve her problems, especially if she could gain control through guardianship. Suddenly, Delilah's escalating campaign made perfect sense. This wasn't just about control or family dynamics. It was about financial desperation. She needed access to my assets to cover her losses and avoid the humiliation of financial ruin. "There's more," Jonathan continued. "We've also discovered that she's been in contact with several assisted living facilities, inquiring about costs and availability. She's been planning this for months, probably hoping to get you declared incompetent, gain control of your assets, place you in a facility, and use the remaining money to cover her debts. The calculated nature of the plan was breathtaking in its cruelty. While I'd been trying to understand her behavior as misguided concern, she'd been systematically planning to steal my life and my autonomy to solve her own financial problems." "What's our next step?" I asked, feeling a cold fury building inside me. "We present this information to the court, along with the medical evidence and testimony from community members. But, Josephine, I need to ask, are you prepared for how this will affect your relationship with Matthew? When this comes out, it's going to destroy his marriage." I thought about my son, the man I'd raised to be honest and decent, who had been manipulated into supporting his wife's scheme because he genuinely believed she was concerned about my welfare. Learning that she'd been lying to him about her finances while trying to steal from his mother would devastate him. "He needs to know the truth," I said finally. "Whatever the consequences for his marriage, he deserves to understand what's really been happening." Tuesday brought the court-ordered psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Harold Evans, a forensic psychiatrist with 30 years of experience in competency assessments. The 3-hour evaluation was thorough and intensive, covering everything from my personal history to current events, mathematical calculations to abstract reasoning. Dr. Evans was professional but thorough, asking pointed questions about my decision-making process, my understanding of my financial situation, and my reasons for making the charitable donation. I answered honestly and completely, confident that the truth would speak for itself. "Mrs. Morris," he said as the evaluation concluded, "I want you to know that this is one of the clearer cases I've encountered. You demonstrate excellent cognitive function, sound judgment, and the ability to make complex decisions based on careful consideration. I see no evidence whatsoever to support claims of incompetence or undue influence." The relief was overwhelming, but I knew the real test would come in court, where Delilah would have one final opportunity to present her case and where Matthew would finally learn the truth about his wife's motivations and deceptions. Wednesday brought an unexpected call from Matthew himself. His voice was strained and confused when he reached me that evening. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Delilah's been acting strange lately, secretive about money, defensive about bills, working late more often. Is there something I should know about our financial situation?" The question broke my heart because it meant he was starting to see through her deceptions on his own. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would irrevocably change his life. "Matthew, I think you need to sit down. There are some things about Delilah's financial activities that you need to know, and I'm afraid they're going to come out in court anyway." I spent the next hour telling him everything Jonathan's investigator had discovered. The hidden debts, the secret investments, the contacted assisted living facilities, and the clear financial motive behind the guardianship petition. With each revelation, I could hear the man I'd raised struggling to reconcile the woman he'd married with the person I was describing. "She's been lying to me," he said finally, his voice hollow with shock. "About everything. The guardianship petition isn't about protecting you. It's about solving her financial problems with your money." "I'm sorry, Matthew. I know how much this hurts." "Mom," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "I am so sorry. I believed her. I actually thought you were declining, and I was ready to let her put you in a facility. God help me, I was ready to let her steal your life because I trusted her more than I trusted my own judgment about my own mother." The pain in his voice was devastating, but underneath it was something that gave me hope, genuine remorse, and the beginning of understanding about what had really been happening to our family. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. By Thursday, word had spread throughout Maplewood about the true nature of the guardianship case, and public opinion had shifted decisively in my favor. The woman who'd been painted as a confused elderly person in need of protection was now seen as the victim of an elaborate financial scheme perpetrated by her own daughter-in-law. As I prepared for what would likely be the final confrontation, I reflected on how completely the situation had transformed. The frightened, isolated woman who'd been gradually losing control of her own life had become someone fighting not just for her own rights, but for the principle that elder abuse disguised as family concern should never be tolerated. The battle was almost over, but the most important confrontation still lay ahead. In a courtroom where the truth would finally, completely, and publicly triumph over months of manipulation and lies. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark, wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across the assembled faces. As I took my seat beside Jonathan Pierce on Monday morning, I could feel the weight of the community's attention. Nearly 30 people had come to observe the proceedings, including neighbors, friends from the library board, members of Independent Living Support, and several of Harold's former business associates. Judge Margaret Rivera, a stern woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, called the court to order precisely at 9 a.m. Her reputation for fairness, but intolerance for frivolous proceedings had given me confidence. But sitting in that formal setting, with my son's marriage and my own freedom hanging in the balance, I felt the full gravity of the situation. Delilah's attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit named Robert Sterling, opened with what sounded like a rehearsed presentation about the tragic necessity of protecting vulnerable elderly individuals from their own declining judgment. He painted a picture of a confused woman making increasingly irrational decisions, culminating in the reckless disposal of nearly half her liquid assets to a charity she barely knew. "Your Honor," he argued, "we have documented evidence spanning 8 months of concerning behaviors, memory lapses, and poor judgment. The recent charitable donation of $400,000 represents exactly the kind of impulsive financial decision-making that guardianship proceedings are designed to prevent." As he spoke, I watched Matthew sitting in the gallery behind Delilah's legal team. His face was pale and drawn, the man who'd discovered just days earlier that his wife had been systematically lying to him about both her finances and her motivations. When our eyes met, I saw pain, guilt, and something that might have been relief that the truth was finally coming to light. Sterling called Mrs. Peterson to testify first, the housekeeper who'd been reporting on my daily activities to Delilah for months. But instead of supporting their case, her testimony began to unravel it almost immediately. Mrs. Robinson asked me to keep track of Mrs. Morris's daily habits and report anything unusual, she admitted under direct examination. She wanted detailed information about her eating, sleeping, medication management, and any signs of confusion. Jonathan rose for cross-examination with a slight smile. "Mrs. Peterson, in all your months of observing Mrs. Morris, did you ever witness behavior that genuinely concerned you about her safety or competence?" Mrs. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Well, no. She always seemed perfectly capable to me. That's why I eventually told her about the reporting requirements. It didn't seem right to spy on someone who was managing so well on her own." "And did Mrs. Robinson ever ask you to exaggerate or mischaracterize anything you observed?" "She seemed disappointed when I didn't have concerning incidents to report. She would sometimes suggest that normal things might be signs of problems, like taking time to find her keys or resting after gardening on hot days." The damage to Delilah's credibility was immediate and visible. Several jurors were taking notes, and Judge Rivera's expression had grown notably skeptical. Sterling then called Delilah herself to testify. She took the stand wearing a conservative navy suit, her blonde hair styled perfectly, every inch the concerned daughter-in-law. But under Jonathan's cross-examination, her carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "Mrs. Robinson, are you currently facing any significant financial difficulties?" Jonathan asked, his tone conversational, but his intent clearly serious. "I don't see how that's relevant to these proceedings," she replied, but her voice had grown tight. "Please answer the question. Are you currently in debt?" Sterling objected, but Judge Rivera overruled him. "The petitioner's financial situation is relevant to her motivations, counselor. Please answer the question, Mrs. Robinson." "I have some normal household debts like anyone else," Delilah said carefully. Jonathan opened a thick folder and began reading from financial documents. "According to credit card statements obtained through legal discovery, you currently owe $47,000 in credit card debt. Is that accurate?" Delilah's composure cracked visibly. "Those are private financial matters. You also have a second mortgage on your home in the amount of $85,000, taken out without your husband's knowledge. Is that correct?" "My husband knew about the mortgage," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "And you've lost approximately $60,000 in high-risk stock investments over the past 18 months, also without your husband's knowledge. Is that accurate?" The courtroom was completely silent. I glanced at Matthew and saw his face pale further as the extent of his wife's financial deceptions became public record. "Mrs. Robinson," Jonathan continued relentlessly, "isn't it true that gaining control of Mrs. Morris's assets through guardianship would conveniently solve your financial problems?" "That's not. This is about her safety and well-being," Delilah stammered, but the damage was done. "And isn't it true that you contacted 3 different assisted living facilities over the past 6 months, inquiring about costs and availability for Mrs. Morris?" I was gathering information in case it became necessary. Necessary for her well-being, or necessary for accessing her home's equity value of $400,000. Sterling was objecting frantically, but Judge Rivera allowed the questioning to continue. By the time Delilah stepped down from the witness stand, her credibility was in tatters, and her true motivations were clear to everyone in the courtroom. Dr. Newman testified next, providing clear medical evidence that I was cognitively normal and fully competent to make independent decisions. Dr. Evans, the court-appointed psychiatrist, confirmed that his evaluation had found no evidence of incompetence or diminished capacity. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Gary Clark, Harold's former business partner, had asked to address the court on my behalf. "Your Honor, I've known Josephine Morris for over 20 years. She and Harold built a successful business together, and she was instrumental in every major financial decision they made. Her recent charitable donation isn't impulsive or irrational. It's completely consistent with the values she and Harold shared throughout their marriage." He paused, looking directly at Delilah. Harold would be appalled to see his widow being subjected to this kind of manipulation and financial exploitation by someone who was supposed to be family. When Jonathan called me to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. This was my opportunity to speak for myself, to demonstrate the competence that had been questioned, and to explain my decisions in my own words. "Mrs. Morris," Jonathan began, "can you explain your decision-making process regarding the charitable donation that prompted these proceedings?" I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I researched independent living support thoroughly, consulted with my attorney about the legal implications, and made a deliberate decision to support an organization whose mission aligns with values my husband and I shared for 43 years. The donation was made through a charitable trust with proper oversight and safeguards. Why was this cause important to you? Because I've experienced firsthand how family members can use concern for an elderly person's welfare to justify taking away their independence and autonomy. I wanted to support an organization that helps seniors maintain their dignity and their right to make decisions about their own lives." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. I was being subjected to guardianship proceedings for making a donation to an organization that fought against exactly the kind of elder abuse I was experiencing. Judge Rivera asked me several direct questions about my understanding of my financial situation, my health management, and my future plans. I answered each one clearly and completely, demonstrating the competence that months of manipulation had tried to obscure. But the most dramatic moment came during Sterling's cross-examination, when he made a critical error in strategy. "Mrs. Morris, don't you think your family's concerns about your welfare should take priority over your desire for independence?" "The question hung in the air for a moment before I responded. Mr. Sterling, genuine concern for someone's welfare supports their independence rather than destroying it. What I've experienced isn't concern, it's systematic financial exploitation disguised as family care." I looked directly at Delilah, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table with her mask of composed concern finally completely dropped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. When someone tries to have you declared incompetent in order to gain control of your assets while they're secretly drowning in debt, that's not love or concern. That's theft, and I refuse to be a victim of it. The courtroom was completely silent for several seconds before Judge Rivera called a recess. During the break, Matthew approached me in the courthouse hallway. His face was streaked with tears, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, I am so sorry. I believed her. I actually believed that you were declining and needed protection. I was ready to let her put you in a facility and take control of everything Dad worked so hard to build." I reached out and took his hand. "You were manipulated by someone you trusted. That's not your fault, Matthew. The fault lies with the person who did the manipulating." "I've filed for divorce," he said quietly. "I can't stay married to someone who would do this to you, to us, to our family. Some betrayals are unforgivable." When court reconvened, Judge Rivera's ruling was swift and decisive. After reviewing, All the evidence presented, including medical evaluations, financial records, and testimony from multiple witnesses, this court finds no basis for the guardianship petition. Mrs. Morris has demonstrated clear competence in all areas of decision-making, and her recent charitable donation reflects sound judgment and careful planning, not diminished capacity. She paused, looking directly at Delilah. Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by evidence suggesting that this petition was motivated by the petitioner's financial difficulties rather than genuine concern for Mrs. Morris's welfare. Such abuse of the guardianship process is a serious matter that may warrant further investigation. The gavel came down with finality, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The ordeal was over. My competence was legally confirmed, and my autonomy was secure. But as I looked around the courtroom at the wreckage of relationships and the exposed cruelties, I realized that while I had won the legal battle, the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. The woman who had tried to steal my life was now facing the consequences of her actions. But my son was also facing the destruction of his marriage and the betrayal of his trust. The crisis point had passed, but its aftermath would shape all of our lives going forward. The weeks following the court victory brought an unexpected mix of relief and melancholy. While my legal triumph was complete and my autonomy secured, the emotional aftermath proved more complex than I had anticipated. The house that had once been filled with Sunday dinners and family gatherings now felt eerily quiet, marked by the absence of relationships that had been forever altered by months of deception and manipulation. Matthew's divorce proceedings began immediately after the court hearing. True to his word, he could not reconcile himself to remaining married to someone who had systematically lied to him while attempting to exploit his own mother. The revelation of Delilah's hidden debts, secret investments, and calculated manipulation had shattered not just their marriage, but his fundamental sense of trust in his own judgment. 3 weeks after the hearing, he appeared at my door on a Saturday morning, looking haggard and older than his 45 years. The confident businessman who had built upon his father's legacy was gone, replaced by a man questioning everything he thought he knew about the people closest to him. "Mom," he said quietly as we sat in my kitchen over coffee, "I keep replaying the past year in my mind, looking for signs I should have seen. How did I become so blind to what she was doing?" I studied my son's face, seeing the guilt and self-recrimination that had been eating at him since the truth emerged. "You trusted someone you loved, Matthew. That's not a character flaw. It's what decent people do in relationships. The failing was hers, not yours. But I was ready to let her put you in a facility," he said, his voice breaking. "I actually believed that you were becoming incompetent, that you needed to be managed and controlled. What kind of son does that make me?" The pain in his voice was genuine and deep. But I had learned something important during my ordeal about the difference between manipulation and accountability. It makes you human, Matthew. Delilah is very skilled at what she does. She spent months creating a false narrative, presenting carefully selected evidence, and positioning herself as the voice of reason and responsibility. She manipulated your love for me into a weapon against me. Over the following weeks, Matthew began the difficult process of untangling 8 years of marriage from someone who had proven herself capable of systematic deception. The financial damage was substantial. Their joint accounts had been depleted by Delilah's hidden investments. Their home was mortgaged beyond its value, and her credit card debts had damaged his business credit. But perhaps more significantly, he was grappling with questions about his own judgment and character. How had he failed to notice his wife's financial recklessness? How had he allowed himself to be convinced that his competent, independent mother was declining? How had he come so close to participating in what was essentially elder abuse? "I think," he said during one of our long conversations, "I wanted to believe that taking care of you would somehow make up for not being able to save Dad. When Delilah presented it as protecting you, It felt like redemption for failing him during his illness. The insight was painful, but important. Matthew had been carrying guilt about Harold's death that I hadn't fully recognized, and Delilah had exploited that vulnerability expertly. She had positioned herself as offering him a chance to be the protective son he felt he hadn't been during his father's final illness. Meanwhile, the broader community response to the court proceedings had been swift and decisive. Delilah's reputation in Maplewood's social circles was destroyed overnight. The woman who had cultivated an image as a devoted daughter-in-law and civic-minded citizen was now seen as someone capable of elaborate elder abuse schemes. Several organizations she had been involved with quietly asked her to step down from leadership positions. More importantly, for my own healing, the community rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. The library board passed a resolution commending my courage in standing up to financial exploitation, and independent living support asked me to join their advisory board. The organization had received significant positive publicity from the court case, with donations pouring in from people who had followed the story in local media. Nora Green called me one afternoon with news that felt like vindication of everything I had endured. "Josephine, your donation and the attention from the court case have allowed us to expand our services to cover the entire county. We're now serving over 200 families, many of whom are dealing with exactly the kind of family manipulation you experienced. The ripple effects of my decision to fight back were creating positive change far beyond my own situation. Seniors who might have been pressured into giving up their independence were now receiving support to maintain their autonomy. Families were being educated about the difference between genuine care and controlling behavior disguised as concern. But perhaps the most unexpected development came from an unlikely source. 6 weeks after the court hearing, I received a handwritten letter from Delilah herself. The envelope bore no return address, but the distinctive handwriting was unmistakable. "Josephine," it began, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or understanding. I'm writing because I need to acknowledge what I did, both to you and to myself." The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same careful script that had once documented my supposed decline, but instead of manipulation and justification, it contained something I hadn't expected, what appeared to be genuine remorse and self-awareness. "I convinced myself that I was acting out of concern for your welfare, but the truth is that I was desperate about my financial situation and saw your assets as a solution to my problems. The charitable donation that triggered the guardianship petition wasn't evidence of your decline. It was proof that you were competent enough to use your money according to your own values, rather than my needs." She described the gradual escalation of her deceptions, from the initial surveillance through Mrs. Peterson to the systematic creation of evidence for incompetence. Most significantly, she acknowledged the impact of her actions on Matthew and on our family relationships. "I destroyed my marriage, damaged your relationship with your son, and nearly succeeded in stealing your independence and dignity. There is no excuse for what I did, and I understand that there can be no forgiveness for it. I'm writing this letter not to seek absolution, but to ensure that the truth is completely clear, even the parts that didn't come out in court." The letter concluded with information that surprised me. "I've entered into a payment plan to repay every dollar I cost you in legal fees and associated expenses. It will take me years, but I want you to know that I understand the financial impact of my actions beyond just the emotional damage." I showed the letter to Evelyn, who read it with her characteristic skepticism intact. "It sounds genuine," she admitted. "But then again, so did all her previous expressions of concern for your welfare. The question is whether this represents actual growth or just another form of manipulation designed to minimize her consequences." I considered her point carefully. The woman who had spent months systematically undermining me was certainly capable of crafting a manipulative apology. But something about the letter's tone, its lack of requests for mercy or understanding, suggested it might be authentic acknowledgement rather than strategic positioning. Matthew's reaction was more complex when I shared the letter with him. "I want to believe that she's capable of genuine remorse," he said. "But I also know how skilled she is at presenting herself as whatever she thinks people want to see." The divorce proceedings revealed additional layers of financial deception that even the court case hadn't uncovered. Delilah had been living beyond their means for years, using credit cards and loans to maintain a lifestyle that her real estate income couldn't support. Her investment losses had been attempts to generate quick profits to cover her mounting debts, and when those failed, my assets had become her target for financial salvation. The woman I thought I married either never existed or disappeared so gradually that I didn't notice, Matthew told me one evening. "I keep wondering if any of it was real. Our relationship, her feelings for me, even her interaction with you in the early years. But amid all the pain and destruction, there were signs of genuine healing and growth." Matthew began seeing a therapist to work through his feelings of betrayal and his questions about his own judgment. He started spending more time at my house, not out of concern for my competence, but simply to rebuild the relationship that Delilah's manipulation had damaged. Most importantly, he began to understand and respect my independence in ways he hadn't before the crisis. Instead of offering to manage aspects of my life, he asked how he could support my autonomy. Instead of making assumptions about my needs, he listened to my actual preferences and concerns. "I realize now that Dad never treated you like you couldn't. Make your own decisions," he observed one Sunday afternoon as we worked together in the garden Harold had planted. "Even when he was concerned about something, he talked with you about it rather than talking about you to other people." The insight was profound and healing. Harold had indeed been a partner who enhanced my independence rather than diminishing it, and his example provided a template for how adult children could show concern without becoming controlling. As autumn deepened into winter, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from one of the most difficult periods of my life. I had rediscovered my own strength and agency. I had deepened my relationship with my son through crisis and truth-telling. I had created meaningful change in my community through both my charitable giving and my willingness to fight against elder abuse. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between genuine care and manipulative control, and I had found the courage to insist on that distinction even when it meant confronting people I loved. The growth and redemption weren't complete. Healing never is. But they were real, substantive, and ongoing. The woman who had almost lost her autonomy to someone else's financial desperation had instead found a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what it means to live, with dignity and authenticity. The foundation for whatever years remained had been rebuilt on truth rather than illusion, and that felt like victory of the most meaningful kind. 6 months after the court victory, I stood in the newly opened Senior Independence Center on the outskirts of Maplewood, watching as dozens of elderly residents toured the facility that my donation had helped create. The center was everything Nora Green and I had envisioned, a place where seniors could access support services while maintaining their dignity and autonomy rather than being warehoused in facilities that prioritized management over independence. Irony wasn't lost on me that the money Delilah had tried to claim through guardianship proceedings had instead created an institution dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of elder abuse I had experienced. What she had seen as her financial salvation had become a bulwark protecting other seniors from manipulation, disguised as family concern. "Mrs. Morris," called out Ruby Murphy, an 82-year-old woman whose adult son had been pressuring her to sell her home and move in with his family, "I wanted to thank you personally. The advocacy services here helped me understand that I had the right to say no to my son's demands. I'm still living in my own home, and our relationship is actually better now that he's stopped trying to control my decisions." Ruby's story was one of dozens I'd heard since the center opened. Adult children who had learned to offer support without demanding control. Seniors who had discovered they didn't have to choose between independence and safety. Families who had found ways to navigate the challenges of aging without sacrificing respect and autonomy. Evelyn, who had decided to relocate permanently from Arizona to Maplewood, joined me as I watched the center's activities. At 74, she had become an integral part of the operation, using her sharp wit and no-nonsense approach to help seniors recognize and resist manipulation attempts from family members. "You know," she said, settling beside me on one of the comfortable chairs in the center's main gathering area. "When I first came here to support you, I never imagined it would lead to all this. You've created something that will outlast both of us." She was right. The Senior Independence Center had become a model for other communities, with delegations visiting from across the region to study our approach to elder advocacy. The legal precedent set by my court case had also been cited in other guardianship challenges, helping seniors fight back against inappropriate attempts to control their lives and assets. But the most significant transformation had been in my relationship with Matthew. The man who had almost participated in having me declared incompetent had become one of the center's most dedicated volunteers, using his business expertise to help seniors organize their finances and protect themselves from exploitation. "I think Dad would be proud of what we've accomplished here," he said one afternoon as we reviewed the center's quarterly report. The statistics were impressive. Over 300 seniors served, 47 guardianship challenges successfully defended, and countless families educated about respectful approaches to aging concerns. "Your father always believed that privilege came with responsibility," I replied. "Using our resources to help others maintain their dignity and independence would have made perfect sense to him." Matthew nodded, then grew quiet in the way that had become familiar over the past months. Since his divorce from Delilah had been finalized, he'd been working through complex feelings about trust, judgment, and family relationships. Therapy had helped, but some wounds take time to heal completely. "Do you ever regret fighting back so hard?" he asked. "I mean, we probably could have found some middle ground, some compromise that would have avoided all the public drama and legal battles." I considered his question carefully. It wasn't the first time he'd asked variations of it, and I understood his lingering discomfort with the conflict and publicity our family had endured. "Matthew, there's no middle ground between independence and control. There's no compromise between dignity and manipulation. What Delilah was doing to me, and through you to our entire family, required absolute resistance, not negotiation." I gestured toward the busy center around us, where seniors were attending financial literacy, workshops, meeting with advocacy counselors, and participating in social activities that honored their intelligence and experience. If I had compromised, if I had allowed her to gradually erode my autonomy in the name of family peace, none of this would exist. All those people we've helped would still be struggling alone with family members who confused control with care. Conversation was interrupted by a visitor I hadn't expected to see. Dr. Patricia Newman approached with a woman I didn't recognize, someone perhaps in her early 60s with graying hair and a nervous expression. "Josephine, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I have someone I'd like you to meet. This is Iris Kelly. She's facing a situation that's remarkably similar to what you experienced, and I thought speaking with you might be helpful." Iris's story unfolded over the next hour with painful familiarity. Her daughter-in-law had been systematically undermining her confidence, documenting supposed incidents of confusion, and pushing for her to move into assisted living so they could sell her house to cover their own financial difficulties. The parallels to my own experience were striking and disturbing. "I feel like I'm going crazy," Iris admitted, tears streaming down her face. "She makes everything sound so reasonable, so caring. But I know I'm not confused or incompetent. I just don't know how to prove it or fight back." I spent the next 2 hours sharing my experience with Iris, connecting her with Jonathan Pierce for legal advice, arranging for her to get an independent medical evaluation, and introducing her to the center's advocacy services. Most importantly, I helped her understand that she wasn't alone and that resistance was both possible and necessary. The hardest part, I told her, is accepting that someone you want to trust is systematically working against your best interests. Once you acknowledge that reality, you can start taking steps to protect yourself. Watching Iris leave with resources, support, and renewed confidence reminded me of why the battle I'd fought had been worthwhile. Every senior who maintained their independence because of our advocacy work validated the difficult decisions I'd made months earlier. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen reviewing correspondence from other communities interested in replicating our senior advocacy model, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. At 74, I had become an accidental activist, a spokesperson for elder rights, and a resource for families struggling with the complex dynamics of aging and control. The financial cost of fighting Delilah's guardianship petition had been substantial. Legal fees, court costs, and investigative expenses had totaled nearly $30,000. True to her word, she had been making monthly payments toward that debt, though at her current rate it would take her several years to repay everything. But the return on that investment had been immeasurable. The Senior Independence Center was thriving, serving families throughout the region. The legal precedent had strengthened protections for other seniors facing similar challenges. And my own life had been transformed from passive victim to active advocate. Matthew's healing was progressing as well. 6 months after his divorce, he had begun dating again, carefully and with the kind of skepticism that comes from having been thoroughly deceived. But more importantly, he had developed a much deeper understanding of what genuine care looked like versus controlling behavior disguised as concern. "I think I understand now why you and Dad had such a strong marriage," he told me recently. "You enhanced each other's independence rather than trying to manage each other. Dad never treated you like you couldn't make your own decisions, and you never tried to control his choices out of fear or insecurity." The observation was profound and suggested that some good might eventually come from his painful experience with Delilah. He had learned, at considerable cost, to distinguish between love that supports autonomy and manipulation that destroys it. As winter gave way to spring, I found myself planning for the future with an energy and purpose I hadn't felt in years. The Senior Independence Center was expanding to include educational programs for adult children, helping them understand how to show genuine concern without becoming controlling. We were also developing a network of volunteer advocates who could provide support to seniors facing family manipulation. Evelyn had been elected to the center's board of directors and was spearheading an effort to create similar facilities in other communities. "We're not just helping individuals anymore," she observed during one of our weekly planning meetings. "We're changing how society thinks about aging, independence, and family relationships." She was right. The work we were doing was having ripple effects far beyond Maplewood. Social workers were referring families to our educational programs. Attorneys were using our resources to help clients facing inappropriate guardianship petitions. Other communities were adapting our advocacy model to address elder abuse in their own areas. On a warm spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after my court victory, I stood again in the garden Harold had planted, now tended jointly by Matthew and me as a way of connecting with his memory and with each other. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness and beauty. I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier, frightened, confused, gradually losing control of her own life to someone else's manipulation. That woman felt like a different person, someone I remembered with compassion but no longer recognized as myself. The woman I had become was stronger, clearer, and more purposeful. I had learned that age doesn't have to mean vulnerability, that family relationships require boundaries to remain healthy, and that resources are most meaningful when they're used to create positive change in the world. My phone rang with a call from Nora Green, updating me on the latest developments at the center. 3 more seniors had successfully fought off inappropriate guardianship attempts. Two families had reconciled after learning better ways to address aging concerns, and a delegation from the state capitol was coming next week to study our model for potential statewide implementation. As I ended the call, I realized that the legacy I was creating would indeed outlast me, just as Evelyn had predicted. The money that had almost been stolen through manipulation was instead creating lasting change that honored the values Harold and I had shared throughout our marriage. The story that had begun with betrayal and financial exploitation had become one of resistance, empowerment, and meaningful impact. At 74, I had discovered that it's never too late to redefine your life, stand up for your principles, and create something valuable from even the most difficult circumstances. The inheritance I would eventually leave behind wouldn't be measured, primarily in dollars, but in lives changed, families educated, and seniors empowered to maintain their dignity and independence. It was a legacy built on truth rather than manipulation, on respect rather than control, and on the unwavering belief that every person deserves to make their own choices about how to live their remaining years. That felt like the most meaningful victory of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.